My wife got a disrespectful tattoo for her AP, and that led to our divorce. It's wild to think our marriage ended over something like this, but here we are. Molly and I were together for 5 years and married for 3. I thought things were good. Sure, we had our usual arguments, but nothing out of the ordinary. Looking back, though, I can see how everything started to unravel. It all began when we were engaged. Molly has always loved tattoos, which was fine by me. I just didn't want one myself. At our engagement party, she excitedly suggested we get matching tattoos to celebrate. I laughed it off, thinking she was joking, but she was serious. I told her I was fine with her getting a tattoo, but I wasn't interested in getting one myself. She seemed a bit disappointed, but I thought that was that. Fast forward a few months after our wedding, and she brings it up again, matching tattoos. I reminded her of my previous response, hoping she'd drop it. But no, every few months, she'd ask again, each time more intense and upset that I wasn't on board. Honestly, it became super frustrating. I kept telling her the same thing. She could get a tattoo if she wanted, but I didn't want one. Simple, right? Apparently not. She started acting like this was a deal breaker in our relationship, which made no sense to me. Fast forward a bit, and Molly gets promoted at work. I was genuinely proud of her. She worked hard and deserved it. She transferred to a new office and started talking a lot about this co-worker named Josh. According to her, Josh was this super cool guy with tattoos, and he was even giving her advice on what ink to get. I wasn't bothered by her talking to a guy at work. I'm not that insecure. But the way she kept bringing him up started to get under my skin. It felt like she was constantly talking about Josh and his tattoos. I held back at first because I didn't want to be that guy who gets paranoid over nothing. Still, deep down, I felt like something was off. Then one night, out of the blue, Molly says something that completely blindsided me. We were just hanging out when she casually mentions, "Josh thinks you're not a real man because you're scared to get a tattoo." I was taken aback. What? Where did that come from? I've told her countless times that I'm not scared of getting a tattoo. I just don't want one. There's a difference, right? So I asked her why she'd throw that in my face. It sounded like Josh was trying to come on to her, honestly. And she just responded, "If the shoe fits." I was stunned. What did that even mean? Did she actually agree with him? Was she really questioning my manhood over not wanting a random tattoo? It didn't make sense. This wasn't like us. I couldn't understand why she was being so harsh, and then she stormed off. I slammed the bedroom door and sat there, wondering if this was really happening. It felt like everything was spiraling out of control, but I couldn't tell if it was just about the tattoo or something deeper. The next few days were incredibly awkward. Molly barely spoke to me, and whenever we were in the same room, there was this strange tension. It felt like she was angry with me for some reason, but why? I didn't want a tattoo. It didn't make sense. Then, a few days later, she mentioned she was going shopping after work. No big deal. She did that all the time. But when she came home, there was something different about her. It was as if she was waiting for me to ask what was going on. So I casually asked how shopping went, and she smiled, rolling up her sleeve to reveal a brand new tattoo on her forearm. I was taken aback. It was 2 Chinese symbols, which she said meant strength and independence. Now, I don't speak Chinese, but I could sense something was off. Molly's white, and she doesn't know a word of the language. Then I noticed the initials underneath the symbols, JWT. I asked her what those initials stood for, and that's when she hesitated. You know that feeling when you just know someone's about to say something that will infuriate you? Yeah, that was me. She took a deep breath and said, "They're Josh's initials." I was speechless for a moment, just staring at her. She had another guy's initials tattooed on her arm. Seriously. Her explanation only made things worse. She told me that Josh had taken her to his tattoo artist and had been there the whole time, supporting her while she got it done. She got a tattoo to honor their friendship, adding his initials, and I was shocked. I told her outright that it felt disrespectful to have another guy's initials on her body and that she should consider removing it. Instead, she turned it around on me, claiming I was trying to control her. She even reminded me that I'd refused to get matching tattoos with her, so she chose to share that moment with Josh instead. That's when I knew we were in real trouble. I couldn't believe she thought I was in the wrong for being upset. How could she not see how disrespectful it was? We barely spoke for the next few days, and when we did, it always circled back to the tattoo. She kept telling me to just get over it, like it was no big deal. But to me, it was huge. After the tattoo incident, I started to see Molly in a completely different light. You know that feeling when you've been with someone for so long, and then suddenly you realize they're not who you thought they were? That's where I was. The tattoo was one thing, but it was more about her attitude. The way she acted like I was overreacting made me feel like I was living with a stranger. One night, I was in the living room watching TV, while Molly was on the phone in the next room. I could hear her laughing and chatting, which usually wouldn't bother me. But then I heard her mention Josh's name, and my heart sank. Doubts started swirling in my mind as I listened to her talk to him. It just rubbed me the wrong way. I couldn't catch everything she was saying, but it was clear she and Josh were way too comfortable. The way she laughed at his jokes, it wasn't the kind of laugh you'd expect between co-workers. That sinking feeling settled in my gut. You know that feeling when something feels off but you can't quite pinpoint it? When she finally hung up, I just asked outright, "Why are you talking to Josh so much?" She shot me a look, as if I was the one being unreasonable, and replied, "He's my friend, Jake." "What's the big deal?" I snapped back, "The big deal is you're acting like he's more than a friend. You have his initials tattooed on your arm, for crying out loud." That probably wasn't the best choice of words because she immediately got defensive. "You don't understand our friendship. Just because you're insecure doesn't mean I'm doing anything wrong." Insecure? That's what she wanted to label me? I wasn't insecure, I was just confused, trying to figure out why my wife seemed closer to some random guy at work than she did to me. But arguing with someone who's already decided you're the villain is a losing battle. So I let it go. The next few weeks were a blur. Molly and I barely spoke. It felt like we were just sharing the same space without actually living together. I'd go to work, come home, and we'd hardly exchange 2 words. She was always on her phone, and I had a sinking suspicion she was texting Josh. Whenever I'd ask what she was doing, she'd get defensive, so I stopped asking. Then one night, everything changed. Molly came home late from work. That week, she kept coming home late, always with some excuse about staying late or going out for drinks with co-workers. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it, but with everything else happening, something felt off. When she walked through the door, I caught a whiff of a perfume that wasn't hers. I knew her scent well, and this was different. I asked, "Where have you been?" She rolled her eyes, acting like I was being paranoid. "I told you, I went out with some co-workers. You don't have to wait up for me every time." "But you smell like someone else's perfume," I shot back. That got her attention. She looked momentarily caught off guard before quickly recovering. "Oh, it's probably just from one of the girls hugging me goodbye or something." I wanted to believe her, I really did, but something deep inside told me she wasn't being completely honest. I didn't want to start a huge fight, so I let it slide for the night, but the doubt lingered. A few days later, things got even stranger. One morning, while Molly was getting ready for work, I noticed she was spending an unusual amount of time on her appearance. She was putting on makeup, styling her hair, and choosing a nice outfit. Things she typically wouldn't do for work. It felt like she was preparing for a date. I asked, "Why are you all dressed up for work?" She laughed it off. "Can't a girl want to look good for herself?" Sure, that made sense, but something still felt off. I didn't push it, not wanting to come across as controlling. Yet in the back of my mind, I was connecting the dots. Her late nights, the phone calls with Josh, the unfamiliar perfume, it all added up to something I didn't want to face. Then one evening, she told me she had a work event and wouldn't be home until late. At first, it didn't raise any alarms, but later that night, a nagging feeling settled in. You know that gut instinct that tells you something's off? Yeah, that one. So I decided to go for a drive to clear my head. While cruising around, I passed by a bar we used to frequent, and, to my shock, there was Molly's car parked out front. My heart raced. I wasn't even looking for it. But there it was. I pulled over, unsure of what I would do, but I couldn't just ignore it. I walked inside and found her in a booth, laughing with Josh, sitting way too close for comfort. She didn't notice me at first, but when she finally did, her face went pale, like she'd been caught red-handed. I didn't create a scene. I simply walked up, looked her straight in the eye and asked, "Is this the work event?" Molly didn't even attempt to come up with an excuse. She just sat there, frozen, while Josh looked like he wanted to vanish. I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned on my heel and walked out. In that moment, I knew it was over. I wasn't going to pretend everything was fine anymore. She could keep her tattoo and her friendship with Josh. I was done. By the time she got home that night, I was already packing my things. I didn't need her explanation. We both knew what was happening, and I wouldn't stick around to be made a fool again. Josh, I was done. No more games, no more excuses. I went home and packed my things. I didn't care if it was late or where I would sleep that night. I wasn't staying in the same house with her any longer. I couldn't even stand to look at her. When Molly finally came home, it was like she already sensed what was happening. She walked in, saw my bags by the door, and her expression fell. She didn't even pretend to be surprised. She stood there for a moment, seemingly searching for the right words, but nothing came out. Finally, she asked, "So you're leaving?" I looked her straight in the eyes and replied, "Yeah, I'm leaving." "What did you expect?" At first, she didn't say anything, just stared at me, as if hoping I would cool down and change my mind. But I was done being treated like a fool. Eventually, she said, "It's not what you think." That's when I snapped. "Oh, really? So you're not at a bar with some guy you've been obsessing over, the one you have tattooed on your arm, while lying to me for weeks? Because that's exactly how it looks." She looked like she wanted to defend herself, but she had no ground to stand on. I wasn't naive. I knew what was going on, even if she hadn't admitted it yet. She tried again. "We were just talking." I couldn't help but laugh. "Just talking. That's what you're going with?" At that point, I was done with her excuses. I grabbed my bags and started toward the door. But before I could leave, she grabbed my arm. I turned around and saw tears in her eyes. For a split second, I felt a flicker of hesitation, like maybe there was still something worth saving. I was left to pick up the pieces, but then everything flooded back. The tattoo, the late-night calls, the lies. I pulled my arm away and said, "This isn't on me, Molly. You made your choices." She didn't stop me as I walked out the door, and I didn't look back. I crashed at a friend's place for a few days to figure out my next steps. It wasn't perfect, but it gave me room to breathe. Ryan was taken aback when I shared what happened. He'd met Molly a few times and thought she seemed nice and normal. But I guess you never really know someone until their true colors show. The following days blurred into a mix of phone calls and texts as I tried to regain some control. Molly reached out several times, sending apologies and requests to talk. But what was there to discuss? She had another guy's initials tattooed on her. There was no excuse for that. I'd trusted my gut from the start, but I didn't want to believe it. Now it was all too clear, and I had no interest in hearing her twisted version of events. A few days after I left, she showed up at Ryan's place. I didn't think she'd find me, but I wasn't exactly hiding. Ryan wasn't home when she knocked, so it was just me. I didn't want to let her in, but there she was, soaked and looking like a wreck. I let her inside. I didn't want a scene out on the street. She came in, soaked, and sat down on the couch. For a while, neither of us spoke. I could see she'd been crying, but I wasn't about to fall for it. I just waited for her to say something. Eventually, she broke the silence. "I messed up, Jake. I know I did." I stayed silent. What was there to say? She already knew how I felt, but she kept talking. "I never meant for it to get this far. I never meant to hurt you." I looked at her and simply said, "But you did. You hurt me, not just once, but over and over. You lied to me." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know, I'm sorry. I don't even know why I did it. I was stupid. A few years ago, maybe I would have taken her words to heart. I might have forgiven her and tried to make things work. But after everything, I couldn't. I wasn't that guy anymore." "Did you sleep with him?" There it was, the big question. I already knew the answer, but I needed to hear her say it. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I did." Hearing her admit it didn't ease my pain, it only made everything feel more real. There was no going back now. I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the rain. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to yell, to scream at her for the betrayal, but I felt too drained for that. "You should go," I finally said, not turning to look at her. She didn't argue. She simply stood up, grabbed her purse, and left. Just like that, it was over. The divorce process was surprisingly swift. Since we didn't have kids or any shared obligations, there wasn't much to dispute. I kept the house, she moved in with a friend, and we both signed the papers. Simple as that. We only spoke a few times during the whole thing, and each conversation felt civil but distant, as if we were strangers rather than former spouses. When the divorce was finalized, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Not happiness or sadness, just relief. It was like a weight had been lifted off my chest. I didn't have to pretend anymore or wonder if she was hiding something from me. I never imagined my marriage would end like this, but I suppose life can be unpredictable. And honestly, I'm okay with that. I'm ready to move on. After the divorce was finalized, I expected that would be the end of our connection. I thought we'd both go our separate ways, and that would be that. But as usual, life had other plans. A couple of weeks later, I started receiving random texts from Molly. At first, they were just polite, meaningless messages. Checking in, hoping I was okay. I ignored most of them. There wasn't much left to say since we weren't together anymore, and I didn't need her checking in like we were still friends. Then one night, out of the blue, she sent me this long message, a real wall of text. She talked about how she was struggling with the divorce and how things weren't going as she had hoped. She even mentioned having problems with Josh, of course, and that her life was... I have to admit, I felt a strange satisfaction reading that things were falling apart for her. It was like, what did she expect? But a smaller part of me felt bad. I didn't want her life to completely unravel. I just wanted her to take responsibility for her actions. Yet here she was, still acting like the victim. She ended her message asking if we could meet up to talk. She said she needed closure and wanted to apologize face to face. I was torn. Part of me didn't want to see her again, but I understood the need for closure. Plus, I figured this would be the last time I had to deal with her, so I agreed. We met at a little coffee shop near where we used to live. I arrived first, sat down and waited, mentally preparing for whatever excuses or apologies she might throw at me. When she finally walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked different, not bad, but worn out, like life had really taken a toll on her these past few weeks. This wasn't the Molly I remembered. We sat there in awkward silence for a few minutes, unsure how to start. Finally, she spoke up. "Jake, I'm sorry," she said, her voice shaky. "I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I realize now how much I hurt you." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. I wasn't there for an apology. I just wanted to hear her out and close this chapter for good. But she kept talking. "I shouldn't have done what I did with Josh. I didn't mean for..." "I wasn't thinking clearly when it happened," I admitted, raising an eyebrow. "You weren't thinking clearly, Molly. You got another guy's initials tattooed on your body and lied to me for months. How is that not clear thinking?" She stared down at the table, fiddling with her hands. I know it sounds bad, but I wasn't happy. I felt us drifting apart and didn't know how to handle it. I scoffed. "So instead of talking to me, you decided to go to him? You thought cheating was the answer?" She fell silent, looking guilty, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook so easily. I'd spent too long trying to understand her actions, and now that she was finally admitting it, it didn't feel like enough. Saying, "I'm sorry," isn't enough. I took a deep breath and leaned forward. "You know, Molly, I loved you. I would have done anything to fix what was wrong, but you didn't give me a chance. You didn't let me in. You just went behind my back and betrayed me." Tears filled her eyes, but I wasn't swayed. I'd seen her cry before, and it always felt like a way to avoid taking responsibility. I wasn't falling for it this time. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," she whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you." I sat back, a mix of frustration and relief washing over me. Frustration because she still didn't seem to fully grasp the gravity of what she'd done, and relief because I was finally voicing my feelings. "Well, you did hurt me," I said flatly, "and now you're dealing with the consequences. We're not together anymore, and that's on you." She wiped her eyes, trying to hold it together. "I know," she said quietly. I don't know what to do now. My life is a mess." I shook my head, the weight of it all heavy between us. "That's no longer my problem, Molly. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." We sat in silence for a while, and I think she finally understood there wasn't much left to say. There wouldn't be some grand reconciliation or closure. This was simply the reality. She made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. After a few moments, she stood up, grabbed her bag, and said, "Thanks for meeting with me." I needed this. I didn't respond, just nodded as she walked out. In that instant, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I hadn't realized how much I needed to say those things until I finally did. The next few weeks were much easier. No more texts from her, and the nagging feelings about what had happened faded away. It was done, over. I could finally start moving on with my life, and that's exactly what I did. I got back into my routine, hung out with friends more, and focused on work. It felt good to return to some semblance of normalcy, whatever that looked like for me now. Molly was in the past, and that's where she would stay. I'm not saying it was easy. There were moments I'd reflect on everything and feel angry, sad, or confused. But every time those feelings surfaced, I reminded myself I made the right choice. I wouldn't let her drag me down anymore. Sometimes things just fall apart, and there's nothing you can do but pick up the pieces and keep moving forward. And that's exactly what I did. Update 3. It's been about 6 months since the divorce, and honestly, I feel like a completely different person. I didn't think I'd get to this point so quickly, but cutting Molly out of my life has made all the difference. It felt like flipping a switch. Strange how the things that once mattered so much just fade away. I've been focusing on myself, trying to rebuild, getting back to the things I enjoy, hanging out with friends, and finally not worrying about someone making me feel inadequate. It's incredible how much emotional weight lifts off your shoulders when you step out of a toxic situation. But of course, Molly wasn't done stirring the pot. One day, I got a text from a random number. At first, I thought it was spam, but as I started reading, it became clear it was from Josh. Yeah, that Josh. His message was a strange apology mixed with some backhanded explanation about why things with Molly weren't going as he expected. He said something like, "I didn't mean for things to happen like this." But what really got to me was his complaint about Molly. Apparently, after I left, their relationship tanked fast. He said he thought things would be different without me around, but it turns out Molly wasn't who he thought she was. He went on about how clingy and demanding she had become, that she wasn't the same person he had gotten close to at work. I couldn't help but laugh. What did he expect? He got involved with a married woman and thought everything would magically be perfect once I was out of the picture. It was almost too perfect, like karma had slapped him right in the face. And now he wanted to talk to me about it. No way. I didn't reply. There was no point. I didn't need an apology or an explanation. As far as I was concerned, they both deserved whatever came their way. They'd tangled themselves up in their own issues. I was ready to move on. But a few days later, Molly reached out again, this time with a phone call. It had been a while since our awkward coffee shop meeting, so I was surprised to see her name on my screen. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won out, and I answered. Her voice was shaky, as if she'd been crying. "Jake, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I really need to talk." I sighed, already feeling drained by a conversation we hadn't even started. "What is it, Molly?" She dove into a long story about how things with Josh were falling apart. She went on about how he wasn't treating her right and how she regretted everything that had happened between us. At one point she said, "I made a mistake, Jake. I didn't realize how much I needed you until you were gone. A few months ago, that might have affected me. Hearing her regret leaving could have felt validating, but not anymore. I was over it." "Molly," I interrupted, "we're done. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. I've moved on, and you need to do the same." There was a pause, and I could hear her sniffling on the other end. Part of me felt a twinge of sympathy, but I refused to get pulled back into that mess. I don't know what to do," she whispered. "I thought things would be different with him, but they're not. I miss what we had." That's when I realized she didn't actually miss me. She missed the security. She longed for someone who would always be there for her. What she felt for me wasn't real. She was just upset that things hadn't turned out with Josh the way she wanted. "I can't help you, Molly," I said, trying to stay calm. "You made your bed, and now you have to lie in it." That was it. She didn't respond, just hung up. After that call, I felt an incredible sense of freedom. I wasn't angry or sad anymore, I just felt done. For the first time in ages, I could breathe without that weight on my chest. Looking back, I realized that what I went through was probably for the best. Sure, it was messy and painful, and there were days when I thought I'd never feel normal again. But now, I'm grateful it happened. It woke me up and helped me see what I truly deserve and what I won't tolerate anymore. Since then, I've been focusing on myself. I've reconnected with old friends, picked up new hobbies, and even started dating again. Nothing serious, but it's been fun. For the first time, I'm not looking for someone to fill a void or fix anything broken. I'm just living my life, and it feels amazing. People say time heals all wounds, and that's true to an extent. But for me, it wasn't just about time. It was about letting go. Letting go of Molly, of the hurt, of the betrayal. Once I did that, everything else started to fall into place. I've learned that you can't control what others do. You can only control how you react. Molly made her choices, and I made mine. I chose to walk away, to move on, and that's probably the best decision I've ever made. So that's where I am now. Life isn't perfect, but it's pretty damn good. It's so much better than before, and honestly, I wouldn't trade that for anything.